The old lecture hall had seen a lot over the decades: brilliant minds, passionate debates, and even a few public meltdowns. But what happened on that rainy Wednesday afternoon would be talked about for years to come, not because of some heated academic feud, but because one man, calm, humble, and universally loved, quietly destroyed arrogance with compassion. That man was Keanu Reeves. It all started with a guest appearance at Redwood College, a small liberal arts school tucked away in Oregon. Keanu had been invited to speak on ethics in film and the role of storytelling in shaping empathy. He agreed, as he often did with smaller institutions, preferring real conversations to media spectacles. The students buzzed with excitement, lining the halls in anticipation. But not everyone was thrilled. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video so you don't miss tomorrow's video. Professor Vernon Hall, a man known more for his ego than his insights, had other plans. A tenured literature professor with a chip on his shoulder and a distaste for what he called Hollywood's manufactured wisdom, Hall saw Keanu's visit as a farce, a popularity stunt, not a scholarly event. He had no patience for celebrities posing as thinkers, and he made that very clear in faculty meetings leading up to the event. On the day of Keanu's lecture, the auditorium was packed, students crammed into seats, sitting on stairs, even leaning against the back wall. Keanu entered in his usual quiet fashion: dark jeans, a plain black shirt, and a blazer that looked like it had been worn to a dozen other events. His hair was a bit windswept, his hands tucked in his pockets. The room fell silent, not out of formality, but respect. "Thank you for having me," he began with a soft smile. "I'm not a professor. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just someone who tells stories and tries to live kindly." Applause broke out, warm and sincere. But then, Professor Hall rose from his front row seat. "Well, Mr. Reeves," he said, voice echoing through the hall, "since you're here to teach our students something, perhaps you can explain how someone who plays make-believe for a living has the authority to speak on ethics?" A hush fell over the crowd. Several students turned, wide-eyed. A few muttered, "No way." Keanu blinked, tilted his head slightly, and smiled. "I'm happy to try," he said, "but only if you're willing to learn." A ripple moved through the room. This wasn't going to be just another guest lecture. Professor Hall smirked, clearly expecting to fluster Keanu. "So," he said, walking slowly across the stage like a courtroom attorney, "what gives you the right to stand before these students and discuss morality, when your job is essentially pretending?" The tension in the room thickened. A few students exchanged glances. Some looked at Keanu with concern. He didn't flinch. He let a brief silence settle. Then, with calm clarity, he spoke. "I understand where you're coming from," Keanu said gently, "but I think you might be confusing acting with dishonesty. Telling stories, even fictional ones, has always been a way humans explore truth. From Shakespeare to Toni Morrison, stories let us feel what others feel: pain, joy, injustice, hope. That's not pretending. That's empathy." Hall snorted. "Empathy? Don't lecture me on empathy. These students need facts, not feelings." Keanu's smile didn't waver, but his eyes focused, razor-sharp. He stepped forward, his voice still soft, but with an unmistakable strength behind it. "Professor, may I ask you something?" Hall raised an eyebrow. "By all means." Keanu nodded. "Have you ever lost someone you loved so deeply it changed how you see the world?" The question hit like a whisper in a cathedral. The room fell completely silent. Hall's smugness flickered, just for a second. Keanu continued. "I lost my daughter before she ever took her first breath. Then her mother, not long after. I've held grief so heavy I couldn't move some days. But you know what helped me heal?" He paused, listening to others, hearing their pain, their stories. That's what empathy does. And if these students walk out of this room better at understanding each other, then I've done something more valuable than quoting Plato. A single student in the back began to clap. Then another. Then half the room. Hall stepped back slightly, his lips pursed. But the fire wasn't out, not yet. Keanu turned back to the students, his voice calm once more. "This isn't about me being right or him being wrong. It's about what kind of person you want to be when no one's watching." Then he looked straight at Hall and added with grace, "And that, Professor, is something we can all reflect on, no matter our title." Professor Hall stood frozen for a second, trying to hide the flicker of embarrassment behind a smug half-smile. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone the world labeled an actor instead of an intellectual. The students' applause had clearly rattled him. "Well," Hall said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "how poetic. Tragedy wrapped in Hollywood lighting. But let's get back to reality. Empathy doesn't change policy. Feelings don't fix systems. Our job is to teach facts, not to coddle emotions. A few students stiffened at the word coddle. One even whispered, "Did he just say that?" Keanu, still standing near the center of the stage, placed his hands gently in his pockets. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he smiled softly and said, "Empathy doesn't replace facts. It gives them meaning." Hall's brow furrowed. Keanu continued, his voice slow, like he was choosing each word with care. Without empathy, facts are cold. Numbers are numbers until you meet the people behind them. Poverty isn't just an economic figure. It's a single mother working 3 jobs. War isn't just geopolitics. It's a scared child who doesn't understand why their home is gone. You can teach facts all day, professor, but without empathy, you're teaching them in black and white when the world lives in color. A quiet murmur spread through the lecture hall. Keanu wasn't raising his voice. He didn't have to. His words carried weight because they came from someone who meant them. Professor Hall crossed his arms. "So you're saying actors are teachers now?" Keanu tilted his head. "No. I'm saying we're all students. Life doesn't hand you a degree in kindness. You earn that by how you treat people." A stunned silence followed. Then one of the students, a girl in the front row who hadn't spoken all semester, raised her hand slowly and said, "That's the most I've learned in this class." The room erupted in applause. The thunder of applause faded slowly, but the weight of Keanu's words lingered like incense after a ceremony. Students sat taller in their seats. Even the usually sleepy ones now leaned forward, eyes locked on the man who had just flipped the room's energy like a switch. But Professor Vernon Hall wasn't done. He cleared his throat, the sound sharp, slicing through the lingering silence. He rose again, slower this time, less swagger in his posture, but still defiant. "Well," he said, straightening his tie, "since we've turned this into a therapy session, let's return to academia, shall we?" Keanu watched him, unblinking. Hall walked over to a whiteboard, uncapped a marker with a snap, and began to scribble. He wrote, "The myth of the noble man." Then, without turning, he spoke. "There's a concept in classical literature, the noble hero. He suffers, he sacrifices, he feels. And the audience worships him for it. But ultimately, it's still a performance. It's still a narrative crafted to inspire sympathy. Real life is messy, eh? We're selfish. And people, Mr. Reeves, don't act out of goodness. They act out of self-interest. Even those who appear generous." He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "So tell me, Keanu, your stories, your charity work, your subway rides, how much of that is genuine? And how much of that is just your version of staying relevant?" A collective gasp rippled through the students. Keanu didn't react. Not with anger. Not with pride. Instead, he stepped forward, placed a hand gently on the edge of the podium, and said with steady warmth, "Professor, I think it's tragic that you see the world that way. Truly." Hall raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the lack of offense. Keanu continued, "If I gave quietly and no one saw, would it count less? If I sat on a bench with someone who was hurting, but didn't post about it, would that comfort mean less? You see performance in kindness because maybe you've forgotten what real kindness looks like." Dead silence. "You say people act out of self-interest. I say people act out of memory of the pain they've felt, the love they've lost, and the hope they still carry. That's what drives good people to do better. Not to be seen, but because they know what it's like to feel invisible." A few students exhaled audibly. Some stared down, emotional. And others just nodded, slowly. Even Hall, for a moment, seemed at a loss for words. Keanu glanced around the room and said softly, "If you're lucky in life, someone shows you compassion before you deserve it. And if you're wise, you pay it forward." A heavy silence hung in the air like a cloud before a summer storm. Professor Hall stood stiffly beside the whiteboard, marker still in hand, but suddenly the lines he'd written felt hollow. Across the room, students sat in silence, not stunned by aggression, but moved by something quieter, heavier, true understanding. Then a voice broke through the quiet. "Professor Hall," a young woman said from the back row, standing slowly. Her voice was clear, but tentative. "May I say something?" Hall turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "This isn't a Q&A." But Keanu, still seated, looked up and gave her a gentle nod. "Please," he said. "Go ahead." The girl clutched her notebook to her chest. She was petite, with nervous energy and dark curls tucked into a loose bun. Her name was Amy, a literature major who rarely spoke in class and never challenged authority. "Until now. I wasn't going to speak," she began, "but I can't stay quiet after what I just heard." She looked at Hall. You told us stories are fiction, that people are selfish, that even kindness is performative. Then her eyes met Keanu's. But 2 years ago, I was sitting on the floor of a hospital hallway. My brother was dying. The world felt like it was crumbling. And this man right here, sat down next to me. He didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was, not at first. He offered me his jacket. He asked if I'd eaten. And he just sat with me. Murmurs rippled through the room. I found out later who he was, she added, voice trembling slightly. But in that moment, he wasn't a movie star. He was just a human, one who cared when he didn't have to. That moment didn't go viral. There were no cameras. But I will never forget what it taught me. Amy looked down for a second, then back up, voice steadier now. You say real life is selfish, Professor. But I think that's just the world you choose to see. The rest of us, we're trying to build something better. For a moment, no one breathed. Paul didn't respond. He couldn't. Keanu met Amy's eyes and gave her the softest of smiles. The kind that speaks volumes without a single word. The applause faded, but something permanent had shifted in the room. It wasn't just admiration for Keanu or even for Amy's bravery. It was a quiet realization that this moment meant something. That maybe this wasn't just a guest lecture anymore. It was a turning point. Professor Hall sat back down, but his once proud posture had softened. For the first time, his eyes didn't carry mockery, only something that looked like discomfort, maybe even reflection. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't smile triumphantly or bask in the attention. He just sat there, still and humble, as if he were a student himself. Then he stood. I want to thank you, Keanu said, his voice calm and steady. Not just Amy, not just the students, but you too, Professor Hall. Hall blinked. Keanu stepped forward slowly, facing him directly, not to confront, but to connect. You challenged me today. You made me dig deeper. And maybe that's what a good teacher is supposed to do. Hall's expression twitched slightly. But I also want to tell you something I've learned, Keanu said. When you've been through enough pain, enough loss, something changes in you. You stop caring about being right. And you start caring about being kind. He took a breath. You asked if what I do is real. If I give for the sake of relevance or image. I don't blame you for asking that. The world has made people cynical, even smart ones like you. But you should know. I give because people once gave to me, when I had nothing. Paul looked up, his expression unreadable. My father left when I was 3. My best friend died of an overdose. My sister battled leukemia for years. I've slept on couches, missed meals, and once stood outside a funeral home wondering how I'd bury someone I loved. He paused, then added, I don't say that to impress anyone. I say that because I've seen the darkness, and I still choose light. Now the entire hall was silent. Even breathing seemed sacrilegious in the presence of such raw honesty. I'm not a perfect man, Keanu said, but I'll spend every day trying to be better. Because someone, somewhere, needs to know that kindness isn't a myth. It's real. It saves people. It saved me. Professor Hall swallowed hard. And Keanu. Keanu extended his hand, not to shame him, but to offer something far more powerful. Forgiveness. Hall didn't take the hand right away. His jaw clenched. His pride fought back. But something inside him, the human part, finally won. And slowly, with visible hesitation. By the time Keanu and Professor Hall's handshake ended, it was as if the entire room had exhaled. The tension that had simmered for the last hour melted into something new, something rarely felt in a lecture hall: unity. Keanu turned back to the students, his voice quieter now. The world teaches you to compete, to be loud, to dominate. But it takes real strength to listen, to lift others, to admit you don't know everything. Students nodded. Some were already typing furiously on their laptops, not taking notes, but capturing the moment, sharing quotes. Keanu Reeves was trending before the clock even hit the next hour. But what happened next wasn't about going viral. It was about what came after. After the lecture ended, a group of students stayed behind, buzzing with energy. One of them, a senior named Malik, stepped up to Keanu as he packed up his notes. Mr. Reeves, he said, I know this wasn't what you came here for, but you said something about paying it forward. Keanu smiled gently. Yeah, Malik nodded. We want to start something. A campus group, not about politics or protest, just acts of kindness. No meetings, no red tape. Just students helping students. Quietly. Consistently. Keanu's eyebrows lifted. That sounds incredible. We want to call it the Ripple Project, Malik added. Because what you said about how kindness spreads, even when no one sees it, That hit hard. Another student chimed in, "We'll organize free tutoring. Food drives. Just listening to people who feel invisible here. It'll start small, but who cares? Even a drop makes ripples." Keanu looked around at the faces forming a circle around him. Eyes wide, voices hopeful, energy electric. He didn't say much. Just, "That's beautiful. I'll support it however I can." Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from his blazer. It was worn, the corners frayed. He flipped to a page and said, "This notebook has quotes, ideas, little lessons I've picked up over the years. Want the first page for your group?" They nodded. He read aloud, slowly. "Be kind. Not when it's easy. Be kind when it's quiet. Be kind when it costs you." Then he tore out the page and handed it to Malik. The students looked at it like it was sacred. And that's how the Ripple Project began. Long after the students had left, after the lecture hall lights dimmed and the last echoes of Keanu's visit faded into memory, Professor Vernon Hall sat alone at his desk. The whiteboard still bore his half-erased phrase, "The myth of the noble man," like a ghost of an argument that didn't age well. His office was silent except for the ticking of an old clock and the occasional creak of the building settling into night. He stared at a photo on his bookshelf, a younger version of himself, standing beside his late wife. She had been the one with the soft heart, the believer. She'd always said, "People are better than you think. You just have to look past the armor." He used to believe her. But grief, it hardens people, turns idealism into skepticism, hope into sarcasm. And maybe somewhere along the way, Vernon Hall had stopped teaching to inspire and started teaching to defend himself. Keanu's words echoed again in his mind. "You've forgotten what real kindness looks like." He sighed, then did something unusual. He pulled out a yellowing journal, a gift from his wife years ago, mostly unused. But tonight, he opened to the first clean page and wrote, "Today I got schooled by someone the world calls an actor, but who might just be the best teacher I've seen in years." He paused, then underlined the next part. "Kindness doesn't need a podium. It just needs a moment." The next morning, students arrived to find a folded note taped to the lecture hall door. In Professor Hall's handwriting, it read, "Class is canceled today. Go do one kind thing for someone, and don't tell anyone about it. That will be your assignment. See you Thursday. V. Hall." By noon, screenshots of the note were everywhere. But more importantly, so were quiet acts of good. A student paid for another's coffee. A faculty member helped a struggling freshman with her workload. Someone left snacks and notes of encouragement outside the library. The ripple was real. And Professor Hall? He sat in his office that afternoon, not feeling defeated. But finally, human again. 2 weeks passed. Redwood College had returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed on the surface. But anyone paying attention could see something had shifted. Students held doors longer, offered smiles more freely. Office hours felt warmer. The Ripple Project had grown, not through promotion, but by word of mouth and heart. Kindness was catching on. And then, one afternoon, Keanu Reeves quietly returned to campus. No press, no announcement, no cameras. Just him, in a charcoal coat, jeans, and the same quiet energy that lingered in the room long after he left the first time. He didn't come to speak. He came for coffee. And maybe something else. He found Professor Hall sitting alone on a stone bench beneath a willow tree outside the humanities building, a spot his late wife used to love. "May I join you?" Keanu asked, holding 2 coffees. Hall looked up, surprised, then nodded with a small, humbled smile. "Didn't expect to see you again." Keanu handed him a cup. "Didn't expect to come back. But I had a feeling." They sat in silence for a moment, watching leaves fall in the gentle wind. No lectures. No debates. Just 2 men, one with weathered pride, the other with weathered hope. "I read your note," Keanu said quietly. "The one on the door." Hall chuckled, shaking his head. "You really got to me, you know that?" Keanu sipped his coffee. Wasn't trying to win, just trying to reach. Hall looked down at the coffee cup in his hands. "My wife used to say that kindness isn't about being soft. It's about being strong enough to care when no one else does." Keanu nodded slowly. "She sounds like someone I would have liked to meet." "She would have liked you," Hall replied. She had a thing for humble people with deep eyes. They both laughed, lightly, sincerely. It was the kind of laugh that breaks through years of armor. Then Hall said something unexpected. "I'm starting a new elective next semester," he said, eyes glinting. "The ethics of storytelling. Think you'd ever co-teach a class with an old cynic?" Keanu smiled. Not a Hollywood smile. Not a smug grin, just something real. "I'd be honored," he said. Spring bloomed early that year at Redwood College. The campus buzzed with something new, not just exams and deadlines, but a subtle culture of kindness. Not performative, not forced, just quiet, real. Students left anonymous notes of encouragement on desks. Professors shared their office hours with struggling students they used to overlook. A donation jar quietly appeared near the library printer with a handwritten sign. "For those who need to print when they can't afford it. Leave what you can. Take what you need." The Ripple Project had no leader, no hierarchy, and yet it thrived. Keanu never returned to speak on stage again, but his presence lingered. One rainy Tuesday, a freshman named Riley was walking across campus, soaked, holding a stack of books and an umbrella that had flipped uselessly in the wind. She was on the verge of tears, homesick, broke, and wondering if college was even worth it. As she reached the small student garden near the philosophy building, she noticed something strange. A bench, the same one Professor Hall and Keanu had sat on, had a book placed on it. Not forgotten. Placed. On top was a sticky note. It read, "If you're tired, sit here. If you're hurting, take this. The world is better because you're in it." K. She opened the book. Inside, a copy of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, and tucked within its pages, a folded $50 bill and a handwritten list of resources: free tutoring, mental health support, food bank hours. She sat down, holding the book in her lap like it was sacred. It didn't matter who Kay was. What mattered was that someone, somewhere, cared. That was the magic. It wasn't about fame, or speeches, or grand gestures. It was about the smallest act, done when no one was watching.